If you were told that a respiratory virus and, a medical intervention were both triggering identical severe psychiatric conditions, you would probably look for the damage inside the brain, right?
Right. I mean, that would be the logical first step for most people.
Yeah, exactly. But what if the data showed that the real damage, the actual root cause of the brain fog, the insomnia, and the depression, was actually happening in your large intestine?
It sounds like science fiction, but it is very real.
It really is.
Yeah.
So welcome to the Deep Dive. Today our mission is to rigorously evaluate the neuropsychiatric outcomes associated with both the COVID-19 infection and its medical countermeasures. We are looking at a massive stack of medical literature for you today.
Yeah, a really dense stack.
Definitely. Ranging from peer-reviewed meta-analyses on post-acute COVID-19 to recent preprint investigations into vaccine reporting databases. And we're going all the way down to cutting-edge research on the gut-brain axis.
Which is absolutely crucial right now because, well, the world is currently facing this unprecedented wave of mental health and cognitive challenges.
Yeah.
And to effectively navigate this for you, the listener, we really have to look at the entire picture. We need to differentiate between the persistent neuropsychiatric outcomes driven by the viral infection itself and the safety signals associated with the vaccines.
Right, because understanding both is literally the only way health systems can prepare for what is coming. Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to look at the scale of the problem, the biological mechanisms driving it, and finally, what this means for future mental health service planning.
And patient care, yeah.
Exactly. But first, I want to set a very clear ground rule for our journey today. Some of the source material we are looking at contains, well, highly polarizing safety signals.
Extremely polarizing.
Yeah. So we are maintaining a strictly objective, impartial tone here. We're reporting the data exactly as the medical researchers and public health officials have documented it, without taking any political sides.
It's just following the data.
We're just following the data. So where do we start?
Well, to understand the scale of what healthcare providers are facing, we really have to start by establishing the baseline burden. We need to look at the infection-driven neuropsychiatric outcomes first.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So a crucial piece of literature here is the Beta-NOC meta-analysis.
Right.
This was a massive, highly rigorous review covering over 18,000 patients who had contracted COVID-19. And it had an average follow-up of 77 days post-infection.
Wow, 18,000 is a huge sample size.
It is. And the numbers they found for persistent symptoms establish a pretty stark baseline. They found a pooled prevalence of sleep disturbance at 27.4%.
Over a quarter of patients.
Yeah. Fatigue was at 24.4%. Objective cognitive impairment stood at 20.2%. Anxiety was at 19.1%. And post-traumatic stress was measured at 15.7%.
Wait, I need to stop you there.
Right.
A nearly 20% rate of objective cognitive impairment is massive.
It's staggering.
And just to be clear for you listening, objective cognitive impairment doesn't just mean a patient self-reporting that they feel, foggy.
No, not at all.
All right, it means they are actively testing poorly on standardized cognitive and memory exams. But I do have to push back a little on how we interpret this data.
Sure, go ahead.
With PTSD at nearly 16%, how do we know this is a direct biological result of the virus?
Yeah.
I mean, couldn't this just be the intense psychological trauma of surviving a terrifying global pandemic?
Yeah.
Especially for those who ended up in an intensive care unit.
That's a really valid question. And psychosocial stress absolutely plays a role here. We cannot discount the psychological trauma of the pandemic environment or the sheer terror of ICU isolation.
Right. It's a traumatic time for everyone.
Exactly. However, the clinical follow-up studies point to a distinct biological driver. There was the Mecca Garcia 24-month observational study.
2 whole years of follow-up.
Yeah, 24 months. They tracked patients who had severe COVID-19 pneumonia and found that these psychiatric symptoms persisted throughout the entire 2-year follow-up. But more importantly, they identified the physiological predictors for these symptoms. So alongside a history of ICU delirium and pre-existing psychiatric history, the strongest predictor was systemic inflammation.
Systemic inflammation.
Yes, specifically indicated by persistently high levels of C-reactive protein, or CRP, in the blood.
Okay, so the presence of CRP is essentially the dividing line between a purely psychological trauma and an actual physical injury.
That is the crucial distinction, yes. CRP is a biomarker produced by the liver in response to inflammation. Its strong correlation with these persistent psychiatric symptoms indicates that there is a biological inflammatory mechanism at play.
It's not just in their heads.
Literally not just in their heads. The virus triggers a systemic immune response, releasing inflammatory cytokines that can actually cross the blood-brain barrier.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And once inside the central nervous system, these cytokines activate microglia, which are the brain's immune cells, leading to neuroinflammation. So it isn't just psychological trauma, it is a measurable physiological assault on the brain's architecture.
That is terrifying. But establishing that baseline of infection-driven harm is so critical. Because if the virus leaves this massive inflammatory footprint on the central nervous system, it kind of begs the question.
Right? What happens with the interventions?
Exactly. What happens when we introduce a medical intervention designed to mimic part of that exact same virus? Does the immune system react the same way?
Which brings us to the vaccine data.
Right. And this brings us to a highly scrutinized paper by Thorpe and colleagues analyzing the CDC and FDA's Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or VARs. And this data spans from January 1990 all the way to December 2024.
Yeah, so to properly evaluate this paper, we first need to define the mathematical tools they used.
Let's do it.
The researchers relied on a PRR, or proportional reporting ratio. This is a standard statistical tool used in pharmacovigilance to identify signals of disproportionate reporting. Essentially, it compares the frequency of adverse events reported for one specific vaccine to the frequency of those same events reported for other vaccines.
Just to see if one is spiking compared to the baseline.
Exactly. And according to the CDC and FDA's own guidelines, a PRR of 2 or greater constitutes a safety concern that warrants formal investigation.
Okay, so a PRR of 2 is the threshold. But when the researchers compared the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines to standard influenza vaccines, the numbers didn't just breach that threshold of 2.
No, they shattered it.
They completely shattered it. The data showed 47 different adverse events associated with cognitive impairment that triggered a safety signal. The researchers found a PRR for cognitive impairment of 118.
Which is just astronomical.
It is. And they also reported a Z-score of 30.9 and a p-value of less than 0.00001.
Yeah.
And for general psychiatric illness, the PRR was 115. And for suicide and homicide-related adverse events, the PRR was 80.1.
Those statistics really require immediate context to understand their gravity.
Please break that down for us.
So a p-value of less than 0.00001 means the mathematical probability of these reports clustering together by pure random chance is practically 0.
It's essentially impossible that it's a coincidence.
Right. Furthermore, a z-score measures how many standard deviations a data point is from the average. In medical statistics, a z-score above 6 is already considered highly improbable.
And they found a z-score of nearly 31.
A z-score of 30.9 is a statistical anomaly of the highest order. It's almost unheard of.
Okay, so to visualize what those numbers mean in a real-world system for you listening, if we think of the VARs database as a building's fire alarm system, a PRR of 2 is like a single alarm ringing in a hallway.
Right, someone burned some toast.
Yeah, exactly. But a PRR of 118 with a z-score of 30, that means every single alarm in the entire city has been triggered simultaneously.
That's a really good analogy.
And look, as an adverse event reporting system, VARs does not tell us exactly how the fire started. And it doesn't definitively prove causality on its own. We have to be clear about that.
No, it doesn't.
But it is an undeniable, statistically massive signal that smoke is present and emergency services need to be dispatched immediately to look for it.
Absolutely. Public health officials must investigate signals of this magnitude objectively. And we also have to look at the temporal association, the timing of when these symptoms actually appear.
Right, the timeline is key.
There was a rapid review by Balasubramanian that analyzed published case reports of psychiatric adverse reactions. They found cases of acute psychosis, mania, and functional neurological disorders that typically began within just 10 days of receiving either an mRNA vaccine or a vector-based COVID-19 vaccination.
Right, vector-based too.
Yeah, which uses a modified harmless virus to deliver the genetic instructions rather than lipid nanoparticles. But regardless of the delivery mechanism, the rapid onset points to an acute immune or inflammatory response.
Okay, so let me summarize where we are. We have two different sets of data here. The post-acute COVID-19 data gives us pooled prevalence, which shows the absolute real-world burden of symptoms in the population.
Right.
Then the vaccine data gives us reporting ratios, which highlight disproportionate reporting frequency compared to other vaccines. They're measuring two entirely different things.
But they are pointing to the exact same systemic assault on the central nervous system.
Exactly. Which leads directly to the most vital question in this whole deep dive. If both the live pathogen and the vaccine, which, utilizes the pathogen spike protein, are generating these severe neuropsychiatric signals, what is the shared biological bridge connecting them to the human brain?
And the answer, according to the latest research, isn't actually found in the brain at all.
Which is wild.
It is. The biological bridge is the gut, specifically the microbiota gut-brain axis.
The gut-brain axis. Okay, let's get into this.
This is where the mechanistic puzzle pieces really start to fit together. The microbiota gut-brain axis is a bidirectional communication network between your central nervous system and the trillions of microbes living in your gastrointestinal tract.
Right, they talk to each other constantly.
Exactly. And research indicates that the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, whether it originates from the viral infection itself or is induced by the vaccine, can cross the blood-brain barrier.
Which is bad enough on its own.
Yes. But its most profound damage actually happens in the gut. The spike protein alters the permeability of the intestinal lining. It creates what is commonly known as leaky gut.
I think a lot of people have heard of leaky gut.
Probably, yeah. And this leaky gut changes the local pH and oxygen levels in the microbiome.
And there's one specific, highly sensitive bacterium that takes the absolute brunt of this environmental change, right?
Yeah.
Akkermansia mucinifila.
Yes, Akkermansia mucinifila.
This microbe does an incredible amount of heavy lifting for our mental health, but it is strictly anaerobic, meaning it cannot survive in the altered, oxygen-rich environment created by that intestinal damage. It literally suffocates.
It suffocates, and the loss of Akkermansia mucinifila has catastrophic downstream effects.
How so?
Well, this bacterium resides in the mucus layer of your large intestine. Under normal, healthy conditions, it ferments dietary fibers to produce short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs, primarily butyrate. And butyrate is critical. It acts as a systemic anti-inflammatory agent across the entire body. Furthermore, it crosses the blood-brain barrier and signals the brain to increase the expression of BDNF.
Brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Exactly. BDNF is essentially fertilizer for the brain. It is absolutely essential for neuronal repair, neuroplasticity, and maintaining cognitive function.
And the biological mechanics go even deeper than that, don't they?
They do.
Because Akkermansia possesses a specific outer membrane protein called AML1100.
Right.
And the research shows this protein actively interacts with the cells lining your gut to upregulate an enzyme called TFH1, which, if I'm understanding this right, is the rate-limiting step in the production of serotonin.
You've got it perfectly.
Over 90% of your body's serotonin is produced in the gut, not the brain.
Yeah, most people don't realize that the gut microbiome is functioning as a virtual endocrine organ. So when the spike protein alters the gut environment and suffocates Akkermansia mucinifila, you aren't just giving a patient gastrointestinal distress. You are actively severing their body's ability to produce systemic anti-inflammatories, neurorepair proteins, and primary mood regulators.
So to map this out for you listening, Akkermansia mucinifila is essentially a microscopic pharmaceutical factory living in your intestine.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. It is constantly manufacturing the raw materials for serotonin, which regulates your mood and prevents anxiety. And it's making BDNF, which prevents cognitive decline.
Exactly.
So if the virus or the vaccine spike protein alters the intestinal environment and bombs that factory, the supply chain is completely severed. The brain is suddenly starved of the very chemicals that prevent depression, anxiety, and brain fog.
And what's fascinating here is that structural collapse elegantly explains the massive overlap in symptoms we are seeing across both data sets.
Right, it connects the two.
Yes. The profound fatigue, the sleep disturbances, the objective cognitive impairment, the sudden onset depression, these are the exact symptoms you see in both the post-acute COVID patients from the Bagnock study and in the vaccine adverse event reports from the VA-AIRS data.
It's the same mechanism.
It is a systemic disruption of the gut mucosal barrier and neuroendocrine signaling. The brain is manifesting the symptoms, but the root pathology is actually in the gut.
That is just mind-blowing. Okay, so we have mapped the cellular mechanisms and we've seen the sheer statistical scale of these symptoms, which brings us to the final and perhaps most critical piece of this deep dive.
What to do about it?
Exactly. If you are a hospital administrator, a clinical planner, or a public health official analyzing this data right now, what are the actionable implications for mental health services and patient care? How do we stop the system from buckling?
Well, the primary directive from the clinical follow-up studies, particularly the Mecca-Garcia research, is that health systems must fundamentally restructure their approach to patient care.
Okay, restructure how?
The traditional siloed approach to medicine, where we bounce patients from a neurologist for their brain fog, to a pulmonologist for their fatigue, to a psychiatrist for their sudden anxiety, it is fundamentally incompatible with a systemic multi-organ disease.
Right, because you cannot treat a disrupted gut-brain axis by sending the patient to 3 different specialists who literally don't talk to each other.
They don't talk. The symptoms are diverse, but they are all coming from the exact same severed supply chain we just talked about.
So what's the solution?
That is precisely why health systems must urgently pivot toward establishing multidisciplinary long COVID and post-vaccine injury clinics.
Integrated care.
Exactly. And these cannot simply be repurposed outpatient psychiatric clinics. The literature dictates that these centers need to seamlessly integrate neurology, neurorehabilitation, neuropsychiatry, occupational therapy, and psychological input all under one roof.
So the clinicians can actually collaborate.
Yes, in real time.
Got it.
Sharing biomarkers and cognitive testing results to treat the patient holistically rather than just treating one symptom at a time.
And from a resource allocation perspective, I mean, we can't just wait for people to show up in crisis, right? We are talking about a pooled prevalence of 20 to 27% for some of these symptoms. If a quarter of the people who contract a severe infection develop persistent, long-term conditions, that is an economic and infrastructural tidal wave.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it requires a massive shift from reactive case management to proactive screening.
We have to get ahead of it.
We do. Planners must look at the BAVNOC data and anticipate specific high-resource utilization. For instance, sleep disorders had the highest prevalence at 27.4%. Standard sleep medicine clinics will be completely overwhelmed without immediate expansion.
Yeah, they'll just collapse under the weight.
And objective cognitive impairment at 20.2% means neurorehabilitation and occupational therapy services need immediate funding increases. We're looking at patients from 2021 and 2022 who are still exhibiting severe psychiatric symptoms 24 months later.
It's not going away.
No. Health administrations must allocate funding for integrated care models today because this is a chronic generational healthcare challenge.
It really is a paradigm shift in how we need to conceptualize and deliver care. Wow. Okay, let's take a step back and look at the territory we've covered today.
We covered a lot.
We really did. We started by looking at the undeniable baseline burden, a staggering 20 to 27% prevalence of severe neuropsychiatric symptoms, from objective cognitive impairment to severe insomnia in post-COVID patients. We then looked objectively at the mathematical reality of the safety signals in the VA system. We observed PRRs of over 100 NDRIs for those exact same cognitive and psychiatric conditions following vaccination.
With a Z-score of nearly 31.
Right, a statistical anomaly.
Right.
Then we followed the science down to the biological bridge, discovering how the spike protein alters intestinal permeability, suffocating the crucial gut-brain factory of Akkermansia mucinifera.
Starving the brain of serotonin and BDNF.
Exactly. And finally, we highlighted the urgent, systemic necessity for healthcare systems to build proactive, multidisciplinary care centers to manage this huge influx of complex, multi-organ injuries.
It is a dense amount of medical data, but it paints a very clear, if challenging, picture of the future of public health.
It does.
And, it leads to one final forward-looking thought based on the literature we've reviewed today.
Oh, I love these. What do you have?
Well, in the Mecca-Garcia study, a history of utilizing traditional psychotropic drugs was actually flagged as a risk factor for persistent psychiatric symptoms.
Wait, really? As a risk factor? Which implies that our standard pharmacological tools might actually be counterproductive for this specific pathology.
That is the implication, yes. Couple that finding with our new understanding of the microbiota gut-brain axis.
Okay.
Could it be that the future frontline treatment for post-viral and vaccine-induced psychiatric disorders bypasses traditional antidepressants entirely? If the root of the trauma is a disrupted intestinal environment, the next revolution in psychiatry might not involve prescribing conventional SSRIs to manipulate the brain.
Because the problem isn't starting in the brain.
Right. It might literally involve prescribing targeted next-generation probiotics like Akkermansia mucinifera alongside targeted dietary interventions to rebuild the gut barrier. We might cure the brain from the bottom up.
treating objective cognitive impairment and severe anxiety by repairing the intestine rather than medicating the central nervous system. That is incredible, and that is definitely something for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends. It turns out when the diagnostic waters are murky, the clearest picture of our mental health might just be hiding in our microbiome. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.